Greetings once again, my friends. I am Drak, and today we're back reviewing. I know it's been a while, and I know that this is basically crunch time because I do want to do so much with the games that I've reviewed for the end of the year. But we finally have gotten to the review that actually started Drak Tries. So, if I remember correctly, my first Drak Tries video was on Song of the Deep for PS4. And today, I can now discuss the review for it. And I'm actually very excited for that concept because I wanted to be able to do Drak Tries, and I actually will probably annotate or link it to my Drak Tries video of it in case you guys want to see the first hour's worth of footage. But I also wanted to be able to do a full review for you guys, especially with a game like Song of the Deep, which was funded by Game Trust, aka GameStop, and made by Insomniac Games, which, if people haven't been following this channel for the year, like, I'm not a big Insomniac fan. My exposure to them was I've played Spyro, wasn't necessarily too impressed by it, but I have been getting into Ratchet and Clank, so I was very excited to take on Song of the Deep and see if they had another hit on their hands. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the review. So this is just going to be a normal vlog format like I've done for the last couple of reviews. People are still asking if I'm going to go back to the original format for the reviews. I am planning on it, but it may not be until the end of the year. And it's just because things are so busy with the reviews that I have right now that I just want to be able to get them out there and be able to see you guys' reaction as well as be able to plan for next year. So that's probably what's going to happen. And even then, I might still do these vlog type of reviews for stuff that I don't think is worth like the full review treatment. So let's go ahead and get into it, starting with the story. So in case you don't know the story of Song of the Deep by now, the premise is that you play Marin, a little girl who was living with her father, a fisherman, and they were living a good life until one day when Marin's father went out to fish and didn't come home. And so at that point, it left her very, very sad. But so Marin resolves to go find her dad. She doesn't believe he's dead. She thinks he's smarter than that. And in turn builds a submarine to go look for him underwater. Now, normally, I mean, a lot of people would take this as a case of lost hope, but Marin is the quintessential video game protagonist. She's very optimistic. She believes that her father has survived and sets out to explore the deeps to find her father. So that's pretty much the premise of the game. There is a little side plot going on as Marin makes her way deeper into the undersea areas that she explores. She comes across an ancient civilization known as the Marrow, or a lost ancient civilization known as the Marrow, where their machines are still kind of working. But the overarching plot doesn't necessarily mess with that unless it's involving Marin and her father. So at that point, the premise of this game is Marin is out to look for her father who is lost at sea. And in turn, while she explores the depths, she goes back to all of the stories that her father told her about the Marrow and about the Tyne and all of those other things. So it's all about Marin trying to find her father. And it's a very endearing story, in all honesty. It's one of the best parts of this game to me is the fact that here's this little girl who is literally throwing herself into harm's way just to go rescue her father. And I will admit right here and now, because I don't have a problem admitting it, very few games bring me to tears, but it does happen. This was one of them. That could be just because I have a daughter now, and I get a little bit more the concept of family, but still, this story it hit all the right notes with me, and it was so endearing to be able to go through. So that's pretty much the story. I gave this thing, for the most part, full marks. I did take off a little bit, but that's just because of, in the end, it doesn't really feel like, and this is partially into the gameplay, it's supposed to be a Metroidvania-style game, where we're supposed to feel like this little girl is in all kinds of peril. There are a lot of times where it doesn't feel like she is. Now, granted, there are guardians and protectors of the ocean, but there are a lot of times when I actually felt like there could have been more peril put into it to add into the isolation and all of the other themes, the atmosphere that this game is trying to convey. And also, I would have loved to have a little bit more of the Marrow plotline explained, and how it ties in, aside from this was stories that her father told her, because the Marrow actually were kind of interesting. So I did take off a little bit, but the story is still awesome. Don't worry too much about that. Let's actually go into the visuals now. And the visuals, again, I gave fairly good marks. I love the style of it, which is very, I don't know how to explain it aside from like paper mache. It's very static background, but everything sticks out from it. And for the kind of game that this is, atmosphere is 100% of what you actually need to establish. And it does. Visually, it does. The enemies look intimidating because these things look like they were at the bottom of the ocean. You know, one of the interesting enemies that they did was Remora, I believe is what they're called. They're the fish with the lanterns at the end to be able to bring fish in. And if people remember like that Finding Nemo scene where they actually discover a Remora and it's terrifying, that's how these things look. And they're actually one of the enemies in the game, which really helped with the terror kind of atmosphere there. So I took off a little bit because there are elements that I felt could have been improved on a little. I'm trying to think of a perfect example. Again, this is another thing where like the Marrow come in and it's like, I get that you're trying to create this lost city of Atlantis, but then you don't really do a whole lot with it in other areas where it's strictly underwater. And there were also a couple times where the deeper you went, I thought that the threat should have been more relevant, and instead they do like this difficulty curve kind of thing to do with it, but that's a gameplay issue. Basically, you start going into bigger enemies, and then eventually, if you go deep enough, you just basically get enemies that can one-hit you, or one-shot you. And I don't know if I necessarily like that, given where I was depth-wise. But visually, this thing establishes the atmosphere that it needs to, as well as the story. The next thing we're going to talk about is the gameplay, and like I said, this is a Metroidvania-style game. So if you've never played that kind of game, Castlevania Symphony of the Night would be one of them. The 2014 Strider, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, obviously the Metroid games. If you played any of these, then you get the premise of it, is that you are thrust into this huge map, and your goal one is to explore, but also to continue to follow a consistent plot. And this game executes it great. There were some issues here and there. I actually thought in some cases most of the puzzles were kill off this many enemies, and I thought they could have done a little bit more with that, especially with a lot of the cooler weapons that they gave me. But it still flowed really, really well and helped to the atmosphere, which is, again, 80% of this game. Atmosphere is what sells it, especially since the best way to explain it is this game is you playing a little girl throwing herself into harm's way to rescue her dad. You're throwing yourself into the most dangerous parts of the sea and going deeper just to discover more danger, but to find your dad. And before people ask me, like, how well did it do to set this atmosphere? When I was a kid, the first Metroid, like, scared me. And the reason it scared me was because you feel alone. You feel like there's nobody coming to help you. If you die, it's over. This is the first... like, I love the Metroidvania style of gameplay. This is the first game in a long time that has actually made me, like, scared for Marin. It brought back that feel of isolation. That anything could kill this little girl at any time, and then she can't find her dad. And everything builds this atmosphere the way it needs to be built to make you feel just as helpless and scared as Marin is. Now, granted, she's walking around in a big old submarine 80% of the time, but nonetheless, you are feeling for her because all it takes is one thing going wrong and her journey is over. And it really establishes that gameplay, in audio, in visuals really well. It really feels isolated and makes you basically it puts you in Marin's shoes. Like, you are the little girl trying to find your dad, and anything could go wrong and you're screwed. So it did really, really well in that regard. And gameplay is as solid as it can be, so my applaud to Insomniac Games. You guys did a great job with it. Moving on to the audio. And again, this is another thing where Atmosphere has to sell it. I will admit, I took off a little bit in the audio because there were a couple of points where I felt the audio was a little too low. I couldn't actually tell if there was background music in that particular area, and background music is a big portion of selling this game's atmosphere. So at that point, I actually felt like, and here's the thing, guys. I play with like professional quality headphones on so that I can immerse myself. And when I'm not hearing anything, obviously I start looking to see if I've accidentally pressed the mute button. And so there were a couple of points where I noticed I can maybe faintly hear something, and I'm like, well, just turn that up. And also the other problem that I had was, for as much exposition as this game has, I felt it could have had a little bit more. So that's kind of my issue with it. I felt like there could have been more voices to the characters in the game, as well as being able to have more narration for some of the other areas that didn't get as much exploration. I also would have liked a separate voice for Marin and her father. And the narrator kind of takes over for both of them. We do eventually get another voice for a character in the game, and that's in essence why I actually want that. If you're gonna do it for one character, you got to do it for it all. I want to hear what Marin's thinking when she's walking into a garden of kelp or something like that. I want to be able to have that experience, and I felt this game could have been added to it. I think the atmosphere could have been helped a lot more if we had it, but it wasn't there. So that's actually where I did a little bit more of a mark against it, was in the audio. I felt like that was the one part that wasn't helping the overall atmosphere that much. With that being said, let's actually go into replay value and presentation. Does this game come together as well as it needs to, both during the game as well as in the end game? Now, for people who have played Metroidvania games, replay value is fairly obvious. You go around and you collect all the items that you haven't been able to find, or in some cases you get like a bonus mode in there, like a boss rush. This one is mostly exploration, the way that I could tell it. And to me, for a Metroidvania game, just exploration doesn't cut it anymore. I mean, if you'd had like a couple of new areas to be able to go explore, which I don't believe anywhere where I actually tried to read up on this to see if maybe there was like bonus levels or boss rushes or something like that, and it didn't look like this game had any. So at that point, if that's not there, because like with Castlevania Symphony of the Night, you had an entire upside down castle to explore. This only said, oh, you know all those items that you didn't find? You know all those missile upgrades that Samus didn't find throughout her journey in Metroid? That's what you have to look forward to. And to me, for hardcore Metroidvania fans, that's enough. For me, I can't justify it as being enough. So I actually did take a little bit of a mark off the replay value. For the overall presentation, though, I'm sold on it. I think even with its lacking audio, the atmosphere was sold as best as it could be with Song of the Deep. And Insomniac has done a great job to be able to put you in the shoes of Marin and get you invested and immersed in her journey. So with that being said, my final score for Song of the Deep is a solid 7.5 out of 10. Now, people might be wondering, like, if I'm praising it so much, why does the score sound so low? Like I said, for all of this stuff, I was minorly taking points off because it could have been a little bit better in selling the atmosphere. It comes together well, but it felt like there could have been a little bit more story, and there could have been visuals was the only one I don't think was lacking. Gameplay had some other things left to be desired to be able to help with that experience, especially with puzzles. Puzzles was a lot of this game, and unfortunately a lot of the puzzles were very repetitive. Audio, there could have been a whole lot more. And so 7.5 is actually, I think, an adequate score. It's a solid C+. And frankly, for Metroidvania fans, this is not a hard sell. I actually would have no problem recommending this to a hardcore Metroidvania fan. I also wouldn't have a problem recommending this to a father of a family. kind of thing, because it's something that everybody in the family can get something out of. And that's going to go ahead and do it for my review of Song of the Deep. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for continuing to subscribe to my content, watching it, liking it, even disliking it, because I do like the constructive criticism. And of course, I will see you guys next time for the review of I Am Setsuna.